Sarah Palin is getting a second chance to convince jurors that the New York Times defamed her in a 2017 editorial. The former Republican vice presidential candidate and Alaska governor is arguing that the paper defamed her by suggesting in the opinion piece that her campaign rhetoric inspired an assassination attempt on Arizona Representative Gabrielle Giffords 6 years earlier. What are the things to look out for as the retrial begins, and what are the broader implications? Mark Zauderer gave the New York Post his take.
My name is Mark Zauderer. I've been a trial and appellate lawyer in New York and around the country for over 50 years. Here's the heart of the case. There were two shootings that we know about back in 2011 and another one in 2017. The first one was the tragic shooting of Gabrielle Giffords by a man named Lochner. The second, we recall much later in 2017, there was a shooting at a baseball game which Republicans were participating in. There was a man named Hodgson who shot at people, including the Congressman Scalise, who was hit. There was an editorial then which was contemplated and ultimately published in the New York Times, which was suggested that there was a link between the political environment and people who were making extreme statements and inciting this kind of violence. And in particular, with regard to Sarah Palin, the editorial that was published in the New York Times suggested that there was what they called a clear and direct link between the Lochner shooting, that's the Gabby Giffords shooting, and the political incitement that arose from a digital graphic that was published in 2010 by Sarah Palin's Political Action Committee, which superimposed crosshairs on various districts, including the district in which Gifford had been shot. And the implication being that this kind of rhetoric, as represented by crosshairs by the Political Action Committee, was part of this atmosphere of incitement, which implied that she was connected to it. And that was the heart of the claim, and said it was untrue. And furthermore, that it was never shown that the shooting that Lochner committed was due to anything other than his mental illness. So she said that this implication was defamatory to her, and she brought suit claiming that her reputation was injured, which is the classic construct. So the New York Times versus Sullivan case in 1964 established what has been a bedrock principle in the field of libel law, that if you are a public figure, you have to show that the allegedly false statement was not only false, but was published with actual malice, which means either you knew it was not true or you acted with a reckless disregard for the truth in making the statement. And that has been golden law since 1964 and has not been overturned. And that was applied in this case in particular. Sarah Palin was a public figure, of course, and she had to meet that burden. But Sarah Palin in the second trial, just as she had in the first trial, has a heavy burden of showing not only that the statement was inaccurate and implied things that injured her reputation that were not true, but you have to show, as we said, a reckless disregard for the truth. And she has evidence that she will present that there was what she will say was sloppy work in preparing in leading up to the editorial, that they had doubts. And then there were, of course, internal emails after the editorial were published by some staff people at the Times suggesting that the editorial linking Sarah Palin or her committee to violent incidents was not something that's been substantiated. So Sarah Palin will offer that evidence to show that there was a reckless disregard for the truth on the part of the New York Times and Mr. Bennett. The first thing that I think the public will be interested in seeing the composition of the jury. In the federal court in Manhattan, where this case is being tried, jurors are chosen from a number of counties that constitute the Southern District of New York. That would include Manhattan, but it includes suburban counties as well, Republicans, Democrats, people of differing educational background. Whereas the trials across the street, which take place in the state court, the jurors are just chosen from New York County or Manhattan. And you may get a very different composition than you'll get with a federal jury that's chosen from several different counties. And I think we'll want to see who's chosen, what we will know about them. Sometimes during the trial, there are questions from jurors. Of course, most of those come later when they're deliberating. And we'll have to see sometimes from the reactions of jurors Are they viewing a witness favorably? Are they doubting a witness's testimony? Jurors often reveal their feelings. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. You look at the expressions or the faces of the jurors. So there can be clues along the way as to how a jury is reacting to a witness or a number of witnesses in the case. Any defamation case in which the workings of media are highlighted and spotlighted, I think makes people in the media sit back and think, how can I do it better? Am I doing it right? Have I done my homework in preparing what I say when I write a report or a news article? So I think it brings about a spotlight on the workings of the particular media outlet. The host on ABC, you may remember, about whether Donald Trump had been found liable for a certain sexual assault, and it was misdescribed inaccurately, and network settled that case, that defamation case brought by Trump. That was several weeks ago. A defamation ruling against a media outlet is always a challenge to the First Amendment, and many argue with substantial authority that the media must continue to have substantial freedom, and that in reporting for the public, there are going to be errors, and we should not hold media liable or so chill their ability to report on things that the slightest error would expose them to financial liability. So the law tries to balance those interests in society, which is the protection of reputation on the one hand of individuals, and on the other hand, the important role of the press in carrying out the values of the First Amendment. And that balance is often difficult to define. And that's why in New York Times versus Sullivan, the U.S. Supreme Court made a very firm statement, a very strong statement, in providing a great deal of protection to the media, saying that if they said something wrong, unless it was done with actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth, there's that certain cone of protection for the media because the First Amendment requires it. I don't second guess juries. I think she has a plausible case. Whether that will get her over the line, given all the legal instructions that she's going to get at the trial, is anybody's guess. And I'm not perspicacious enough to know how that would come out.